So this Zoom briefing, as we approach the festivals of Halloween and one that's called Samhain, is to talk about modern witchcraft. And with us, we have a panel of people to help us in the discussion. So just to introduce all of you, and the details are on your email for the journalists, just to check credits and so forth. So we're joined by Jennifer Ousel from the University of Durham, who's the Education and Youth Manager at the Pagan Federation, and her colleague, Dr. Melissa Harrington, who is also with the Pagan Federation, who manages the Northwest District. And we have Lucia Harrington, who will tell us all about WitchTok, which is on TikTok. And then our academics in the room today, Dr. Helen Berger from Brandeis University near Boston in the USA. Thank you for joining us. I know it's early in the morning, Helen. Dr. Angela Puka from Leeds Trinity University with a special interest in paganism and shamanism. The pronunciations on this call are tricky today. And Dr. Ethan Doyle White, who is an author and journalist, written a book about Wicca, history, belief and community in modern pagan witchcraft. So how this is going to work is that we'll have a conversation for the first half hour. The journalists on the call, if you'd like to ask a question, you're welcome to intervene, ask in the chat box or join us. But we'll get the conversation going now for the first 20-25 minutes or so. So, Jennifer and Melissa, perhaps I could start with you and ask you to kick things off today. And just by talking about the festivals, we're doing this because it's nearly Halloween. We have the Festival of Samhain, and Jennifer, you've written a fact sheet for us on this. Can you just talk us through the basics? What is the difference between Halloween and Samhain, and how are they celebrated in the UK today?
Okay, so Halloween, I think a lot of people are familiar with how people celebrate and have traditionally celebrated Halloween. There is a case to be made that a lot of what we have in Halloween came from Ireland into America with the migrations from Ireland to America, and then came back into the UK from America with the additions of things like pumpkins, which are brilliant because they hurt less when you try and carve them. Halloween is essentially a Christian festival. It is the eve of All Hallows. It's effectively All Saints' Day. And it follows All Souls' Day, which was a Christian festival that celebrated the martyrs. So the connection with death is there. In popular modern culture, though, that Christian link has been largely lost, except in Catholic Church services. And it's become associated with mischief, trick or treat, which is it's that thing where we like to scare ourselves, and we sort of enjoy horror films and we enjoy scaring ourselves. And so for that reason, for some, it has a connection, I think, in the popular imagination with evil. Samhain is a pagan festival. It's not celebrated by all pagans. Heathens are the obvious exception that follow a different calendar. Heathens are pagans that follow the northern Saxon Viking traditions. But a lot of pagans follow something called the Wheel of the Year, which has 8 seasonal festivals in it. So they celebrate solstices and the equinoxes, and then what are called the fire festivals, which are Imbolc in the spring, Beltane at the beginning of summer, Lunasa in August, which is sort of the beginning of the harvest time, and Samhain, which is the third harvest. It's sort of the apple harvest and the end of the harvest period. It literally means the end of summer. So it's the beginning of the dark half of the year, and a lot of pagans celebrate it as the beginning of the new year. For pagans, it has an association, particularly the very strong association with pagans is with ancestors and ancestry, and with, I think the best way to put it is with maintaining and reinforcing their relationships with the dead, whether that be the dead in their own families or a more homogenized idea of ancestors.
So they're not interchangeable. Halloween and Samhain are not interchangeable.
Not entirely. I mean, a lot of pagans do the typical Halloween thing. So a lot of pagans enjoy carving pumpkins and putting them on their doors. In normal years, a lot of pagans take their children trick or treating. So, but I think there's a real difference of emphasis, and the difference of emphasis is on this. It's a time of reflection. It's a time where a lot of pagans practice divination. And as I say, there is this really serious, the connection with the dead. I mean, in Halloween, we think about ghosts and, you know, that sort of slightly scary thing. That connection is there for pagans, but it's more serious. It really is about thinking about the people in your family that have died, remembering them, and celebrating the fact that they're still a part of your family.
If I could add on that.
Sorry, Helen, just to introduce you, this is Helen Berger from the USA.
University from the USA. And I would say that this is a religious holiday for pagans, for most pagans. And I think that's what Jennifer is getting at. And Halloween here, and as Jennifer says, we recreated it from the Irish tradition, and it is a celebration of children having fun and collecting candy. And I think it's a very different emphasis. I think what they share is this theme of death and of the dead in some way coming back. I think that there is an overlap, certainly here in the US, of looking at death, but not very seriously in Halloween. And it's mostly, at least here, a children's holiday. Adults get into it somewhat, but it's more for children. I'm sorry, Jennifer, I felt the need to add.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is a very important point to make. And also for a lot of pagans, certainly for a lot of pagans that I know, Samhain is the most important festival of the year. Where, you know, in our sort of modern culture, we tend to think Christmas is the big celebration. And for a lot of pagans, Yule, the midwinter solstice, is the big celebration. But there's also a lot for whom this, for myself personally, this is the big one. This is the most important celebration of the year.
So we've explained where you're coming from, Jennifer, in regards your association with the Pagan Federation and the pagan festival and so forth. But Halloween is traditionally associated with witches. So, and this Zoom call is about modern witchcraft. What is the association between Halloween and modern witchcraft and Samhain, the Pagan Federation, and witchcraft?
Only insofar, I think, as in popular culture, people think about witches and tell stories about witches at Halloween. And I think, and this is something I think we'll come on to later, the only issue with that is that that is often given very negative connotations. You know, you love to scare yourself with stories of evil witches. And that has repercussions because witchcraft and Wicca is one branch of paganism. So paganism is more of an umbrella term. There are many different traditions within paganism. Some people regard them as religions, some of them don't. That's a huge topic, but there are many different traditions within paganism. So Wicca, traditional witchcraft, druidry, goddess worship, heathenry, all of these are different, and I tend to think of them as having family relationships. They're different to each other, but there are certain family traits that they have in common. And the one that is best known, certainly in this country, the one that is usually the focus of any media attention is Wicca or witchcraft. And there is a slight difference between those two because Wicca is an initiatory tradition, whereas not all forms of witchcraft are. And I think the issue, and certainly, you know, something the Pagan Federation, and I think most pagans are quite keen to do, is to point out that Wicca and witchcraft are legitimate, normal, fairly mainstream, really, you know, religious ways of being, and that, you know, that they're not people out casting evil spells on people or putting hexes on people. And so, you know, really the only connection is that it can be a time when witches get a lot of bad press. That might be one to ask Melissa about, because that is her tradition.
Well, let's come to Melissa. Thanks, Jennifer. So Melissa, when we talk about modern witchcraft, what are we actually talking about?
Yeah, well, we're talking about a modern revival, which we can effectively date from the mid-20th century, when Gerald Gardner wrote the first books on it, the first factual books on it, about his discovering a coven and becoming part of that coven and wanting to promulgate this religion that he thought was a lost old religion that had survived since the burning times. It's a very romantic myth, and it has many fascinating roots that Professor Ronald Hutton has investigated, and Philip Heselton, an ex-surveyor. So if anybody wants to look at the writings of Philip Heselton and Ronald Hutton, you can see where it came from, and various traditions. But a very strong influence on it was the magical revival of the end of the 19th century. And you can see in that this desire for an antidote to industrialization. And you can also see secularization, and how Christianity and the larger religions are kind of losing their grip, and there's spiritualism with the world wars, and you can see that people are looking for this magical alternative and green movements are growing. So it's very much a modern response to that, that's looking to something older and agricultural, the agricultural idyll, the rural idyll. And there was a lot of very educated, quite wealthy people were involved. So they had classical educations, so they're bringing back the classical gods. And it was the first, it's important to realize it's the first religion in thousands of years to bring back the goddess. So it had all these main religions with only the god, only the male face of the divine. And here was something that brought back the worship of the goddess. And it just took off exponentially without promulgation, because witches don't proselytize, because they just don't see any point in it. And it's just snowballed and grown and changed, and is constantly, the titles and the meanings are contested, and this is what we're talking about today, really. Hopefully we'll cover how it's in some ways same old, different titles, different medias. So we can call it a revived religion, or I prefer the title contemporary paganism, just to distinguish it from ancient paganism, because there's no direct link. And Professor Hutton's come up with an excellent title for what I write about and do, which is modern pagan witchcraft. So it's modern, it's pagan, it comes under the umbrella of paganism, earth religions, contemporary earth religions, and it's witchcraft. And in that way, we differentiate from witchcraft as in a Christian heretical movement with satanic witches, etc., a reaction, or from things like African witchcraft, which is their own particular set of beliefs growing out of African culture, Christianization, etc. So it's very difficult at times to understand all the different titles and practices, etc. So it causes a lot of discussion. And one thing everybody here will tell you, if you have 13 witches in a room, there'll be 15 different opinions.
So perhaps I could bring in Dr. Ethan Doyle-White at this point. You've written about Wicca, history, belief and community. And just to ask you about the idea of the divine within the modern witchcraft movement, Wicca. Could you just describe what is the idea of the divine? I mean, you mentioned there, Melissa, that it was a goddess. Is it a kind of divine that intervenes? And does it intervene for the good, for evil? What's the idea of the divine in modern witchcraft, Ethan?
I think if we talk about modern pagan witchcraft, or often referred to as Wicca, although there are arguments about what exactly is Wicca and what isn't. But in general, one of the interesting factors is it's quite a sort of theologically diverse movement. And there are different groups with different perspectives on the nature of divinity, for example. When Wicca was beginning to be when it was being popularized by Gerald Gardner and the Gardnerian tradition in the 1950s, 60s, there was this idea of a kind of a duotheism, a horned god and a goddess, a sort of male-female binary. As the traditions expanded, people have taken that in sort of different directions. Some groups, particularly influenced by second wave feminism, especially in the United States, although not exclusively, basically moved towards a sort of goddess monotheism. Made no use of the god as a sort of symbol or whatever. And then other groups have moved in more explicitly polytheistic directions, working with lots of different gods and goddesses, usually drawn from pre-Christian mythologies in Europe. But sometimes also, you will find sometimes modern pagan witches who bring in, I don't know, the goddess Kali or a deity from other parts of the world. There are also a small number who purely worship the horned god and not a goddess. They sort of go in a sort of god monotheism. So there's this kind of diversity, which is actually quite interesting and plays with our conceived ideas of what religion is in sort of Western society, where we tend to think of theology as being the central thing that defines it. God monotheism as we find in Christianity. Wicca kind of shifts the goalposts a little bit and is more like something like Hinduism in that respect, with this broader theological diversity.
But can I just ask you, Ethan, it seems to be quite a pick and mix approach. What is there an essential truth that all these various strands of belief adhere to? Is this the divine as a creator? Is that the essential truth?
No, would probably be mine. I mean, others may butt in and disagree, but I think there are differences in sort of the theological belief. Gerald Gardner, again, was sort of somewhat called the father of Wicca. He was a central figure in the 1950s and early 1960s. Argued there was something which he called prime mover. Now, this is a term he's taken from earlier philosophy. The idea that there is a sort of creator, a transcendent or perhaps pantheistic creator, and the deities he is venerating, the horned god and the sort of goddess figure, are in a sense lesser figures, but they're also more relatable. In a little bit, this is a little bit like what you find in some West African traditions and African diasporic traditions, where there is a transcendent supreme deity who is so far off that we can't understand, but there are other deities, sort of lesser deities if you want, who are more relatable. But I'm sure you'll find a great deal of diversity in Wiccan theological thought. So what I'm giving you will be disagreed with by certain practitioners who have their own interpretations.
Right. Well, thank you, Ethan.
Could I just butt in very briefly there, please?
Yeah.
This is, in some sense, that's the wrong question. And I think it rises out of the fact that religion in the West, and certainly post-Enlightenment Christian religion, is very firmly based on theology, and it's very firmly based on belief. And what unites paganism, what the family traits are, is far less about belief and about commonality of belief as it is about other things. What those other things are, you can argue till the cows come home. Pagans tend to be united more by practice, by what they do, than by what they believe. And there tends to be a particular way of relating or orientating oneself towards the world that is quite relational. So there is more agreement. You will find pagans taking part in ritual together, but they don't necessarily have the same theological understanding of what exactly that ritual is doing. And there's no issue with that. In paganism, there's no feeling that they ought to have. So to some extent, what is the core belief, what is the truth at the back of it, is not a helpful question to some extent.
Okay, here's another unhelpful question, Jennifer. What relationship is there in modern witchcraft with evil and casting spells?
Well, those are two completely different things. Firstly, relationship with evil, I would not say that there is any more relationship with evil than there is in any other religion. You get good people and bad people in witchcraft like you do in Christianity or Hinduism or Islam. There are Satanists. I am not aware, I'm willing to be contradicted on this by anybody, I am not aware of any Satanist group that identifies as pagan. So I don't think there is an explicit, sorry?
I was going to say, and in the United States, the Satanists are doing some very wonderful things.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
To ensure civil rights for other Americans. So you can't put the Satanists as doing evil. They have been doing some really very wonderful things to protect all Americans' religious rights. I won't go into that. I just wanted to add that for the Satanists.
Yeah, also, can I also add something on the topic?
Yes, Angela, yeah.
That in Italy there is actually a group of Satanists which call themselves as spiritual Satanists, who actually want to be identified as pagans, but it's just that the pagan community doesn't really want them to identify as pagans, for the very obvious reason that in media portrays Satanists as evildoers, and as Helen Berger was saying, it's not quite the case when it comes to contemporary satanic practices.
Interesting.
But it is quite important, I think, to say that Satanism and paganism are different things, and that this is the point that is absolutely crucial, that witches do not worship Satan. And I think that is something that sometimes comes across. It's one of the real basic fundamental misunderstandings. There is no connection. There is the horned god that Ethan mentioned in some branches of Wicca and witchcraft that is often associated with the pre-Christian god Canunus. But it is not the devil. And therefore there is no absolute association. And because we've got the things coming out of the witch trials, where witches were specifically being accused of worshipping Satan, it's something that's got into the popular imagination, and it is not true.
So does that mean that are people reluctant to say that they're witches because of historical association?
I would say so, yes. I think people, in my experience, people are much happier to say that they're druids, for example, than they are to say that they're witches. And I think it is this association with this word.
So, but could you say, I mean, how wide is the definition of a witch? Are all pagans druids and people in your umbrella shape of paganism? Would you say that they're all witches?
No, absolutely not. No. Well, it's actually more complicated than this, but in basic terms, they all come under the umbrella of paganism. It's paganism that's the umbrella term, not witch. Witch is a branch, it's a tradition that exists within paganism. Right.
Thank you, Jennifer. I wonder if we could turn now to Lucia, if you're still on the call, Lucia.
Yes.
You've followed the growth of WitchTok, which is witchcraft on TikTok. And I read somewhere that there were 5 million baby witches, they're called, on TikTok. Can you just tell us what's going on in this world that not many of us are perhaps intimately acquainted with?
Okay, but first I want to say is that that kind of idea that there's 500 baby witches, it's very, I don't think that really puts across what's really happening within like what you'd call young witchcraft, and also on TikTok and on the internet, and the kind of cultures and communities that exist within the internet. Because basically all that WitchTok is a kind of sub part of TikTok that is, and their videos connected by the hashtag WitchTok. But that video that someone posts could be absolutely anything, and someone could post hashtag WitchTok on something that aesthetically looks maybe something witchy, but doesn't necessarily mean they are actually practicing witchcraft, even though there is a lot of other people who are real baby witches who are genuinely practicing witchcraft, what they would call witchcraft, and using it as a platform to educate people about whether their practice. But then again, whether their practice is like of witchcraft is the same as like what you would understand as witchcraft, or some of the academics or people who practice witchcraft here is very contested. And like to actually define what witchcraft is, both from an academic sense and from a looking at the way young people use it and the way it's used on the internet, is very difficult to define.
So when you see reports that social media is fueling a rise of witchcraft, is that correct?
I'd say no. I'd say it's, oh, actually, it depends. I'd say it depends, actually. So I wouldn't say that social media is fueling witchcraft, but I would say that social media gives an opportunity, especially TikTok, actually, like for users who use TikTok, to push this more out into the open and for people practicing witchcraft to come together. But I will say that it's, as it becomes filtered out into social media, it becomes more and more vague, and in some cases, and so some people can then become identifying as witches but not actually practice witchcraft, or it becomes more of a, they might say, it can turn into many different things. Also, but however, I will say that the kind of the way algorithms work, say on TikTok, it's like you don't have, like, for example, I myself, I've come from a Wiccan family, but I'm not initiated as a Wiccan. But just through things I like, that is nothing to do with witchcraft. It could be like the fact that I like videos on TikTok relating to Fleetwood Mac, candle making and that kind of thing. I suddenly, on my TikTok feed, have got witch talk videos. And that's what's pushing it more out into the open. And it's just because it's an algorithm picking up similarities between different subcultures. And that's what's made it more popular, I think. But then there is a thing on social media that is being pushed where witchcraft is being capitalized on, because people can make money from selling crystals and selling candles to people, and it becomes more, and at that point it can become almost more of an aesthetic that people are prescribing to, where they're buying witchy things rather than actually being a part of a practice. So just because these witch things are being pushed sometimes by some companies or some forms of social media doesn't mean actual witchcraft is being pushed. Some actual witchcraft though is being taught, but it's more from like teenagers in their bedrooms just making videos about what they're doing, much like what YouTube used to be. But yeah.
Thanks, Vicky. It's fascinating. There was this incident on TikTok. I don't know if any of the speakers want to come back on this, when baby witches hexed the moon, and there was a big discussion about whether there would terrible calamities would befall the world because of this. I don't know, Dr. Helen Berger, you've observed the growth of witchcraft and looked at teenage witchcraft in particular. Have you got anything to say about that?
So, I'm looking at this in terms of the hexing that's usually avoided. One of the things Jennifer didn't mention is the threefold effect that comes back. Anything that you send out comes back to you threefold. So there tends to be a fear, particularly among baby witches, of doing this. So it's very amusing that these young people took that on to quote unquote hex the moon. And I'm not even sure what that quite means, what it means to hex an actual source of divine inspiration, because the moon is drawn down at the full moon into the circle. I'm trying to think what it means. But in terms of the teenage witches that I and Doug Ezzi, I wrote the book with Doug Ezzi at the University of Tasmania in Australia, looked at, of course, it was a while back now. So we did not have TikTok witches back then. This is new. But when we looked at the young people who were joining, and it was in part media fueled then, because there were all the TV shows, Sabina and other shows, what we found is that it did have the effect of having people look at witchcraft more than they might have before. It was something that was in their view. And that most of them who looked at it, most of the people who we interviewed, the young women who joined with 2 or 3 other people, 2 or 3 other girls, everybody else dropped out but them. And I suspect there were people who we didn't find in our net, all of whom checked it out and none of whom stayed. I mean, that obviously would also be. So I suspect TikTok works the same way, is it gets people interested because their algorithms throw the films onto their feed. They look at it, and I wonder how long they're witches for. So I suspect that some of them are witches for 4 weeks, and I'm not even being sarcastic. And then they leave it and they go on to the next thing. And some of them get more heavily into it and actually enter the spiritual or religious aspects of it. But I wonder what percentage. Lucia, maybe you know, I see you want to speak.
Yeah, well, I definitely don't know the percentage. I also have no idea how someone would try and find that out. But also just, it's like, I mean, how do you even define witchcraft is another thing. Like, I think that's very contested in itself. And just because you may practice divination, say, like, I'm going to use some tarot cards, I'm going to use a pendulum to make a decision today, does that mean I'm really a witch, or am I just experimenting with something I find interesting, much like people would read their zodiac astrology forecast for the week kind of thing? And it's like, in many ways, is this like another form of just like something people find interesting as a hobby? I wouldn't necessarily think that for everyone it's a religion. And like, at what point would you call yourself like a pagan or a Wiccan? And I think, though, that there is definitely something within younger pagan movements, is this idea of eclectic witchcraft, which is kind of being put across in like Harmony Nice's books, and she's very popular amongst young witches, but she's not an academic. She's literally, again, just a YouTuber who sat in a bedroom and practiced Wicca and talks about that. And through talking about that, that's made it more accessible. But just because people practice that doesn't mean they're actually witches. And I will say that it kind of is a bit of a fashion trend within subcultures, say like within the goth scene, and within, say, like more hippie groups, there's like aspects to it. But to call yourself a witch, like and a proper witch or a proper Wiccan or pagan, I think that's completely different.
Thank you. Thanks, Suchi. Could I just turn back to Jennifer and Melissa, if you'd like to comment on this before we could, excuse me, good to take some journalist questions after this. But in the research I did, there was some consternation or concern amongst people who'd been initiated into Wicca and had done the training and understood the traditions, and they were in a tradition, to this phenomenon of social media baby witches, the new generation of witches. Jennifer, perhaps I can ask you to unpack this and explain what the concerns are and what's being done about it. And then after this, perhaps we can take a journalist question.
Okay, I don't, it's not universal for a start. Not everybody is upset about it. All of us came into paganism somehow or another. And for an awful lot of people, I mean, I'm going back to my generation now, the thing that got a lot of people my age interested in paganism was Robin of Sherwood. And, you know, as with TikTok, a lot of people got interested in paganism through that. Some of them stayed, and some of them went further and explored deeper. I think there has always been, and I don't think the issue is so much with age, and I don't think it's so much with social media. I think it comes back to what Lucia was talking about in terms of how do you define, where are the boundaries, where are these contested boundaries? And for initiatory traditions such as Wicca, where there is a great deal of study, you know, you don't automatically say, I'm a Wiccan, so you are. And the same with some kinds of druidry. Where you have spent a lot of time studying, practicing, and then somebody comes along and they have a candle, so they're a witch. It causes discussion. I think it causes discussion more than it causes anything else, because, you know, you can call yourself what you like. I think where there is conflict, or where there is potential conflict, is where people who have not got a background of either initiation or training, or sometimes even study, even self-study, start publishing books that are not researched and that these are then given, presented as something that has weight or authority within the pagan community. And some of them, I know there's been a lot of controversy about this recently on Amazon, some of them are obviously ghost written. What they've done is taken part names from well-known pagan authors and put them together, and you don't know who has actually written it, but there's been an attempt to give it weight and authority. And I think that this idea of where are the borders, that is an area where there's some contesting, and how is authority defined? Where does authority come from, such as it is within paganism, which is a whole different conference. Those areas are quite contested, but I don't think there is huge upset about people coming in when they're very young and not having a lot of ideas, and it being a big thing on social media. I don't know if Melissa, Helen.
I do want to speak. Yes, I do want to speak on that one, please. Yes, so it's interesting to see journalists wanting to know about young witches on TikTok and what old witches think, and this false idea of a conflict, actually, because roughly around the millennium, there was an academic interest in teen witches, and Helen Berger and Doug Eze did the main research on it, and their book is excellent. And there was also Peg Alloy and Hannah Saunders, who did a compilation anthology that I wrote in. And what I said as a witch and an academic was that this wasn't a new thing, that it wouldn't cause a massive rise, and exactly what everybody else has been saying, it's an interest that will cease, but some will carry on. And that is what I said, and that proved to be true. We are not seeing a rise in young witches, we are seeing a rise of a different form of media and social media. And what I said in my chapter, which I should put on Academia, I do and will do, is just that I interviewed my own initiators, and I was a teen witch, I was totally a teen witch, but in my era in the 80s, I had to get my friends to come to something in the shed where I'd painted astrological sigils on the floor, and they thought it was deeply embarrassing. But these lot have more opportunity. I'm quite jealous of them, really. But my initiators who initiated me, they'd seen Alexander's prancing about doing fake black masses. He was really controversial to the older witches of the day. But then Gerald Gardner published fiction books first rather than fact books, because he didn't want to offend his initiator. So every single generation, the young lot are discovering it, and they're talking about it. And most initiated witches are not at all angry that they're happy that they're doing that. I mean, Hexing the Moon, it was one individual, probably it was really stupid, but we've all got our own stupid stories that we've shared with each other. So I've actually watched some of these TikToks, and some of them are phenomenal, that a young person can actually get that piece of information in that short amount of time. Like one I saw on retrograde planets, it's really clever. Some of them are funny, some of them are stupid, but last night one came up on an initiates only forum with a lot of old initiates, and none of them knew what it was, but a younger person had forwarded it. He was in his 20s, and just as an example, it's this pretty young girl, and it says something like "Witch Top Witch," and she goes, "I don't know who you are." And then this voiced over thing, they're all into voiceovers, goes, something like, "You should do, bitch." And none of us knew what it was about, but this young bloke unpacked it for us. But he had to write an essay to show us that actually the second voiceover was of a lady who was very angry with a big knife going, "You should do, bitch." And it had gone viral as a meme, like that cat one. And so they're actually speaking their own language. They've got their own memes that are all playing with it. It's all social media play, and it really needs some study now, 20 years after Helen and Doug's work, really. It's a new thing, but nobody's really angry with them at all. I can see how when Alexander was prancing about getting my initiators totally interested, the older witches of the day, Doreen Valiente and Patricia Crowther, had been working with the Home Office to get witchcraft recognised. They were furious. They thought he had lost their chance to get us recognised as a serious religion. So it's just more of the same.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. And I'm pleased to say we've got a question coming in from Maddie. I don't know if you'd like to ask it in person, Maddie.
Yeah, there have been various mentions of study as a way of, I suppose, gaining authority. And also, obviously, a lot has been made of the variety of beliefs. I'm just wondering if speakers could say a bit more about essentially how truth is discerned, where authority seem to come from, essentially what the focus of study is, and whether there's a sort of what the relationship is between sort of religious experience or spiritual experience directly versus the tradition. Are there specific people who have specific authority within the tradition? All that cluster of issues, really. I'm just fascinated to hear more about that.
The quick answer is it depends, as always. There are traditions where there are sources of authority. Wicca, initiatory Wicca springs to mind in particular, where there is a passage of authority through lines of initiation, starting for many with either Gerald Gardner or Alexander's, and through the high priests and high priestesses of the various covens. To some extent, in some orders of Druidry, there are sources of authority, there are correspondence courses that people take that pass on the tradition. But even there, within Druidry, you are expected to question it. And I think the whole issue of authority is very tricky. Pagans tend to be quite countercultural people. They tend to be people that think for themselves, and they tend not to like the idea of authority or somebody telling them what to do. There aren't, in any traditions that I'm aware of, to some extent, to a limited extent, the Eddas are within heathenism, but there aren't really scriptural sources or anything that passes as scriptural sources. There's the Book of Shadows from Gerald Gardner in Wicca, there's the Bardas of Yola Maganog in Druidry, but they don't hold scriptural status. So there's no text to which people are referring. There are charismatic people, as there are in any tradition, that draw people around them, and they sort of gain charismatic authority in that way. And there are books that gain a lot of readership. So from that sense, there are sources of authority, but not in the sense that you might think of if you were talking about one of the religions of the book. If you were thinking about Christianity or Islam, authority is a very different issue. Some traditions have ordained sort of the high priestess and the high priestesses in Wicca. A lot don't have ordained clergy. Different people might lead services at different times. The issue of tradition versus religious experience, I think this is a huge one, and this is one that a great deal could be written on. A lot of pagans talk about something called UPG, or unverified personal gnosis, which is truths that have come to them through personal religious experience. And they may suggest that these hold value for all pagans, or they may just say, this is something that's been revealed as a truth to me. The only time that really clashes with, that doesn't often clash with tradition. Sometimes there's debates about it within heathenry, but not much wider than that. I don't know if anybody else
can I intervene?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that what Jennifer said is pretty accurate in that, of course, it kind of depends on the tradition, because there are certain traditions which are in history. And so, of course, the authority depends on how the tradition is structured. But another interesting fact that I observed during my fieldwork is that even with eclectic pagans, which form groups on their own, we're not talking about in history traditions, but just groups of pagans who gather. And of course, during their gatherings, you will have people who will be, the priestess and the priests. And I have observed over time, of course, my fieldwork is in Italy, so I'm referring mainly to the Italian situation. Although I know that there have been occurrences in the UK as well, which are on the same line. But yeah, the idea is that even when you have eclectic pagans or eclectic pagan witches gathering together, there is kind of, even though paganism kind of eludes the idea of authority, there is this kind of tendency or trend towards trying to find a leader in each group. And usually it is the community itself which elects somehow the priest or priestess, for example. So yeah, I found it to be quite interesting, because of course it's, in most cases it's not even something that happens formally. It's not like you have an election or something which, you know, you can kind of quantify how many people actually want that specific person to be in charge of the ritual. It is just something that kind of happens in a very I wouldn't know really how to put it, in a very harmonious way. So it is just that it's just so happens that the community really wants that specific person because they recognize that they have, for example, more experience, or they see them as a reference point, and they automatically will be put, sometimes even if they don't ask for it, they will be asked or be put somehow into a position of being a reference point, and, for example, performing rituals as a priestess or as a priest.
Thank you. Thanks very much. There's another question here in the chat box. How can the media be a good ally to contemporary paganism? What good tools does a journalist need?
Thank you so much for asking that question. That is such a brilliant question. Thank you. I think basically don't make assumptions and do your research. And I would say that the two, in the UK, the two main points of call would be the Religion Media Centre. I've written some briefing sheets on various aspects of paganism that are available there. I know Melissa is going to be writing one on Witchcraft and Wicca in the next couple of weeks. So, you know, go there. There are sources of information there. And the other one is the Pagan Federation, and I'll put the link in the comments there, which is, you know, as well as being an organisation that exists to help pagans, it also exists to represent paganism to the wider world. And so any press inquiries that come into the Pagan Federation, we will find you an expert on what it is that you want to talk about, to talk to you about it. So I think those would be my first 2 points.
Yeah, absolutely. Jenny's absolutely right. Also, don't reproduce any old rubbish you see anywhere, because there's been real problems with press reproducing things that has no basis whatsoever and is very, very negative. I mean, I could talk longer about that, but I won't. But yeah, don't just, because one paper's reproduced something, it doesn't mean it's right. It could be very wrong, and it could have done a lot of damage in its time.
Do you tend to get bad publicity at this time of year?
This time of year is usually really good publicity. This time of year is fabulous. Journalists seek us out, and there's always stuff like this going on. It's a little irksome for the other pagans, but then witches and Halloween, you know. So this is a very good time. I will briefly refer to what I'm talking about. I've actually got my notes on Academia Edu on this, but it's a terrible issue. It's where occasionally some horse has been damaged somewhere, and the next thing the newspapers say, satanic witches have tortured this horse to death. And there's usually absolutely no reason for that at all. The poor thing's died of a heart attack, smashed its teeth out on the floor. The badgers have eaten its soft bits. But there was something going on a couple of years ago where they kept filming this dead foal, which had exploded in the heat, never been moved. And they were coming up with all of these theories. But then the journalists were looking at old newspaper articles that said there's a satanic calendar and these horses are being killed according to the satanic calendar. And in one of them, they actually got interviews with Cassandra Latham, who is the world's first tax office registered village witch, who's an amazing lady, and they juxtapose pictures of her with stories about mutilation of a horse, and it's all completely wrong. The research I did, it turned out that this satanic calendar had been created by the very people that caused the satanic panic in the late 80s and 90s. So please do not, as a journalist, reproduce rubbish. Just come to these sources, Religion Media Centre, Pagan Federation, and just ask. And I mean, to have somebody like Helen Berger on today and some of these other people, you've got the top academics available who've done studies that can give you enormous amount of references to do it right. So that would be my advice.
Right.
Add one other thing as an academic, is that like with any group, there are some people who are witches or pagans who do terrible things. I was an expert witness at a trial of a man who I came to speak for Wicca and what it was. But this man was a Wiccan, and he was found guilty of murdering 2 children. And I believe he did indeed murder these 2 children. So, but, you know, there are other people in the United States who have also murdered children and other people who are Christian. And that doesn't mean that there's a problem with Christianity. He didn't murder these people because he was Wiccan. He was a Wiccan who was also found guilty of murder. And I honestly, I looked at all the records. I would say, yes, he did murder his stepdaughters.
Wow.
So yes, it was horrendous. But yeah. I think one has to say that not all of any group are wonderful human beings. And that doesn't mean the whole group should be seen negatively or that it's caused by that. And so I did want to add that as something to keep in mind as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Helen. We're drawing to a close here. We've got 6 minutes left before we close. Could I just introduce a new topic, which is climate change and the health of the planet and the essential place of creation within the tradition. I don't know, perhaps Ethan would like to come back on this, but any of the speakers would like to talk about whether the increased understanding of the harm that people are doing to the planet is leading to a renewed interest in religions that have the earth at the centre. Ethan, I don't know if you have anything to say, or Jennifer.
Yeah, I'll try and speak quickly so someone else can come in as well. I don't know about whether there's sociological data showing that people are getting involved in paganism specifically because they're interested in environmentalism. But certainly since at least the early 1970s, a lot of modern pagans have started describing their beliefs as earth religion or nature religion. So at the very least, on a sort of rhetorical level, there is this attempt to link modern pagan religions with a more nature-centric attitude, which by extension can also be quite an environmentalist attitude. I think Helen's done some work in her recent good book, Solitary Pagans. Read it, everybody, it's good. On looking at how much this actually influences environmental action on the part of individuals. Because just because it's sort of rhetorically you're describing yourself as an earth religionist does not intrinsically mean you'll do more environmentally sustainable things. But there is at least a link there, at least in theory.
Helen, do you want to come back quickly? I know you've got to leave in a moment.
Sorry. Yes, and indeed, thank you, Ethan, and thank you for your lovely review of my book as well while we're here. But I would like to say that I looked only at primarily American pagans. So my research is a comparison. And so there's debates within scholars about this. But what I did find is that in terms of environmentalism, pagans are more environmentally active than other Americans. Of course, somebody could say, Helen, that's a low bar, but they pass that low bar. And for me, that's significant. The question is that enough for people who claim to be an earth-based religion? Some scholars say no. So I would say about 20% of American pagans are active in environmentalism. What's very interesting is they claim environmentalism is the most important social movement for them. And then when you ask them what they do, it doesn't end up that way. That to some degree, they're more active in gay, LGBTQ, whatever the latest letters are.
How are you going to celebrate the festivals of Halloween and or Samhain? Jennifer?
Personally, tomorrow evening I have an online blot with a heathen group, which is looking particularly at telling the stories of the ancestors. So we're bringing something with us, a photograph or something that belonged to somebody in our family in a previous generation. And we're spending some time with that and talking about it. And on the 1st of November, which for a lot of pagans actually is Samhain, I have, again, a meeting. This is a whole thing. What has COVID done to ritual? With an online Druid Grove, where we will actually be doing the usual Samhain ritual using Zoom. So I haven't done anything like that before, so that will be quite interesting. I have an altar. I have an ancestor altar. I'll be burning incense on that, and I'll be lighting candles, and I'll be offering mead and bread on that. And I'll probably be watching a horror film.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Jennifer. I think, Melissa, just you can have the final word. You've got a visual aid there for us.
Well, I will be decorating my house frivolously today, and then I'll be making lots of pumpkin stuff and getting lots of sweets in for the local kids. Then I will be doing a little ritual in my temple, but I will also be on a Zoom ritual, which we're doing as remembrance to Ken Rees, who was the first person to teach witchcraft in adult education in London, and was Susan Greenwood's initiator and mentor in her fabulous book. And so there's a lot of us going online to hold a Samhain ritual, particularly to commemorate him. So there'll be 3 levels. There'll be populist, well, 4 really, home, kids, and then little ritual, and then an online ritual. So I'm doing both. I'm doing in the body and online. Yeah.
Well, thank you, and thank you to all our speakers for joining us today. It's been a full discussion. And just to say, do keep in touch with the Religion Media Centre. Put your email in the chat box before you go. And there's another Zoom call on Thursday, and that one will be on philanthropy with Paul Vallely and Rosie Dawson. So thanks again for joining us, and all the best for now. Bye.
Bye.